Hello, everybody. It's Tim here again. Had another movie review. I just recently got to see The Flash, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. I'll just jump into it and say 4 out of 4. Awesome film. Not a flawless film. It's not as good as it was hyped up to be by the overhype, like online and stuff, by WB and some like DC fans and stuff, or people who saw the early screenings. It's not one of the best superhero films ever made. It's not in the league with stuff like see, I consider there to be like an A category and then like an A plus category. A plus category is like a Dark Knight, a Batman Begins, friggin' let's see, Logan, um, Infinity War, the first Iron Man, stuff like that, um, or Endgame as well. This is in the A category, not an A plus, but A category. This is one of the better superhero movies, and it's one of the best DC movies. And yeah, it's easily one of the better superhero movies. But it's not in like the main top, like top 5 or top 3 like best superhero movies ever. It's in the A category, which I guess still makes it one of the best superhero movies, kind of, but not one of the very best. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, overall it was a 4 out of 4. It's like you said though. Again, it's not a flawless movie. There's some problems here. Some of the time travel stuff does get a little bit confusing, no matter like how you try to sort it out in your head. And when it's a movie about time travel, you have to let certain stuff go because some of it, like when they're talking about multiverse and crossing over from one timeline to another and creating yet another timeline and all that kind of stuff, it can become kind of confusing. Now, this movie has had like a rich, crazy history where it's been like put into production, about to come out, finished production, about to come out, and then they're like, oh shit, bring it back, reshoot. And then they're like, oh shit, bring it back, reshoot again, and all the Ezra Miller like craziness or whatever from off screen. I'll just say this: he's the best thing in the movie. Ezra Miller is awesome here. This is the best performance I've ever seen this man give as not just as the Flash, but acting wise. Period. I never hated Ezra Miller. He was good in the Harry Potter spin-off movies. And I thought he was good in the Snyder Cut, but here he excels. This is his best performance. He plays like two totally different versions of himself. One a younger version from an alternate timeline, and his regular traditional version. And he makes them feel totally different characters. Like the younger version is much more hyper and hyped up, and he is maybe a little annoying at first, but you warm up to him because he's so fun to watch. I was laughing my ass off at 90% of his jokes. But yeah, he does an awesome job here. And they do great special effects of showing how like they're two different characters and all that, making them look different. And every now and then you can kind of see the seams just a little, but for 99, probably about 90 to 99% of the movie, it looks really good. And the one bad thing about this I have to point out is, of course, the CGI. A lot of people have pointed this out. There is some wonky CGI in sequences. Um, some of it you can tell though, like the director said, is like a stylistic choice because they're in the speed verse. Like the look of some of the CGI, you can tell it was meant as a stylistic choice, but that still doesn't make it good visually to look at on screen, regardless. Because and there's one main sequence. Most of the CGI in this is still pretty good to find. And after a while, you get used to the look of the style of the CGI because you're into the story and into the movie, and the emotional like drive of the that the film's going for. But the opening sequence, when Batman is off on his adventure, Ben Affleck's Batman, and the Flash is kind of like his new Robin, and he's off on his adventure, saving all these babies from like this big hospital or whatever that's come crashing down. And you get the sequence where he's like collecting them all. You got one that's in a microwave and all that. Like when they do a close up on those babies, they look pretty wonky. Like, yeah, there's some wonky, like artificial look CGI going on here with these children. But it's a really fun like sequence though, and once again Ezra Miller does a really great job here, where he's like collecting food and stuff because he has to eat it to constantly charge up his metabolism to have the energy to keep running because he runs so fast, so he uses up more energy. It's still a really fun sequence, and Ben Affleck's Batman scene here at the opening is awesome. Like in terms of the action, it really made me want that Ben Affleck Batman film. It really made me want it, baby. That would have been awesome to get. And it's a shame we're most likely never going to get it. Not even as an Elseworlds flick. And it was a shame because he was awesome here in this opening. His action, peak, baby. Peak Batman. Um, and then you get a Wonder Woman cameo in the opening where she like shows up and helps out Batman and all that. And he's like, Ben Affleck's like got a hold of the lasso and he like starts spouting off some funny lines about how he's really lonely and stuff. And Ezra Miller shows up and he's like accidentally touches the lasso of truth and he's like, I've never experienced sex or what. It was pretty funny. There is some like funny, like kind of a little slightly edgy humor in here for this, which makes sense because it's a PG-13. But there's more like curse words in this than I expected to hear. Like there's a lot of dick jokes in this from Ezra Miller, which are actually pretty funny. Um, but yeah, and then Wonder Woman gets her cameo and she like flies off and this is a direct sequel to the Snyder Cut, by the way, because they reference the Snyder Cut in the time travel scene in the Snyder Cut. And the Flash is talking about how he wants to time travel back and save his mom, stop him from ever happening. And he's also talking to Ben Affleck. He's like, I could even save your parents. And Ben Affleck, of course, tells him, we're not meant to change the past because these things are what make us who we are. You can't alter the timeline without changing everything. And you know, the butterfly effect. But you know he does it anyway because he wants to save his mom, and you understand why. And you connect with the Flash in this movie on a human level, and he goes back in time to like save his mom and all that. And of course, it changes everything and creates a new timeline. At the same time, there's a shadowy figure we see in the Speed Force who like knocks the Ezra Miller Flash like out of it, and a pretty fun sequence. And we're gonna wonder who that is, but you know by the end of the movie they're gonna wrap back around to it. I will say this: the movie is slightly maybe too long. Overall, though, it's so much fun to watch, and the special effects with like his running like super speed are the best in my opinion. Like super fast character special effects I've seen, better than Quicksilver from X-Men: Days of Future Past. Um, Mostly because probably the whole movie's built around the dude instead of like we never got a whole movie built around Quicksilver. But yeah, it's like a time to save his mom, and it creates like a new alternate timeline. And Michael Keaton is Batman. And most of the Justice League does not exist in this timeline. We find out later that Superman was actually killed, which, yes, I was a little bummed on that because I felt like it would have been neat to see Henry Cavill in this. I know he actually filmed a cameo that was cut, and they do mention him at the beginning. They show him on footage, like taking care of a volcano somewhere around the world, so to let you know that he is still around this timeline. I mean, in the Snyderverse or whatever, the main DCEU, as for right now, before the reboot. But he'll let you know that he's still around. But when they go back in time, whatever, they don't have him, and eventually they find that Supergirl's there in his place. And you find out later that Zod actually killed the baby Superman, Kal-El, in this timeline because he was trying to distract the Codex from his body. But you find out that he didn't have the Codex in this timeline. Supergirl's actually the one that has it. And she's being held in like a Russian gulag where the Russian government's like experimenting on her and shit. And it's taken pretty much directly from Flashpoint. The basic setup of this movie is kind of like taken from Flashpoint, and some of the elements are. But overall, it's not really a Flashpoint adaptation. It's its own movie. And I will say this, by the end, I did feel like maybe we should have like had a smaller Flash film before this. And maybe it would have been stronger with a Flash villain in it at the end instead of Zod. Because, you know, we've kind of already seen this. I mean, why do like a tribute to Man of Steel? You know, But overall, though, the third act, I've heard some critics say that they didn't like the third act or whatever because it was into the just standard superhero action and all that. But that's why I liked it because it was fun by the time they got to the third act. Like the movie is slightly over long, so even though we got the first like a whole half of the movie or whatever before the third act, the first two acts, where it's Barry trying to figure out what the hell's going on with the timeline and all that, and trying to team up with the new Barry to figure out, you know, what's going on and what they can do. And he gives him his powers and takes him to where he's going to get the lightning strike. And it takes away the original Barry's powers, and he has to eventually get his powers back with help from Michael Keaton's Batman, where they got to electrocute him. And pretty cool, fun scene. And of course, Supergirl flies him up to the sky. You've seen it in the previews. And that's when he gets hit by lightning again, and it causes him to get his powers back again. But yeah, for like the first whole like entire half of the movie, it's mostly just them on like a time travel adventure, which I know some people were probably like, "Well, that's refreshing. There's no supervillain and all that." But at the same time, even though I was having so much fun with the first half of this movie, I was like, you know, I feel like something's missing. Like I did feel like we needed a villain to like propel the story forward. Like we needed someone going on here because most of it is just like them trying to figure out like what to do in this timeline and him trying to like protect people from seeing like two Barrys and all that shit, and him teaching like the new Barry how to use his powers and everything. So there was no like driving threat, really. Because Flash didn't seem for the most part, and I'm sorry about the coughing, it's a little humidity in here. Flash didn't seem for the most part to really want to change things until he realized by the end of the movie he had no choice. So there didn't really seem like there was a driving threat for the movie until the villain showed up. So I appreciated that when it came in. Even though, once again, the first half of the movie is not boring or bad or anything. I mean, there's a little slightly lull parts because it's a long superhero movie. You're going to get some downtime. That's just the way it is. But overall, highly entertaining. And they keep doing jokes about how in this alternate universe Eric Stoltz is Marty McFly, not Michael J. Fox. Which, if you know the history of them of that movie, he was originally going to be Marty McFly, so that was pretty damn funny. And in this timeline, apparently, he got his wish. But yeah, they go to visit Michael Keaton probably about midway through the movie, and of course he's Batman. He shows up with this long hair and like beats the shit, tries to beat the shit out of them because they're intruders. And he finally calms down, and they're like talking to him about everything. You find out pretty much the Tim Burton Batman has like been retired because Gotham no longer needs him, and they decide to like tell him everything that's going on. He's like, no, I don't want to help you, which is pretty funny because you can tell he's like been in a rut for a while because he's been so used to not being Batman. And when he gets to finally be Batman again, or gets inspired to be Batman again because he hears that Barry went to rescue his mom and all that through the time thing, which you know, of course, Batman lost his parents every timeline. Batman's pretty much the same or similar. So he's like, I will help you. And that's when you get that scene where he walks in, he's like, I'm Batman. And when he goes out and actually gets to be Batman again, you can see it on his face that he's having a blast to getting to be Batman again because he hasn't been Batman in so long. It's kind of like an in joke about how Michael Keaton hasn't been Batman in so long, you know. And I'll say this, Michael Keaton did an awesome job in this film. Like, his action scenes are great. Probably the best, like, hand-to-hand fights in the movie. Other than, like, the cool, you know, Speed Force stuff with the two flashes at the end and the climax, which are really fun. But yeah, really fun action scenes, and when they break Supergirl out or whatever, and Supergirl's like kind of disillusioned with humanity because they had her captured and all that and tortured her basically. But when she gets her powers back, she like flies off and beats the shit out of the Russian military. And eventually she does decide to help him or whatever because she sees how ruthless Zod is at killing humans. And I will say it is kind of a quick turnaround for her, but I did buy it because of the act. I bought it for the most part because of the actress's acting. And then that's when they decide to go take it to the battlefield to try to stop Zod. And they keep trying, and they're pretty much winning for the first like part of the fight. They're beating the shit out of them. But then you realize that they're getting overpowered because there's just basically too many Kryptonians. And it would take all of them teamed up together basically to probably kill Zod. And he just has too many henchmen. There's just too much going on. They can't take them all out by themselves. So then they all start getting killed. Like Michael Keaton's Batman gets killed in the pretty epic action scene where he like commits suicide to like take everybody out, try to take everybody out, the Kryptonians. And Supergirl gets killed by Zod, and who distracts the Codex from her body. And so the Flash is like, well, what the hell do we do? Let's reset time. So they reset time again, come back, try to save them, but they keep failing, and it's because they've reached like an ultimatum. There's no way to change this part of the timeline for the universe that they're in now because these characters are meant to die. The world is meant to end here. Like, Zod is meant to kill them all and is meant to take over the Earth in this timeline. So there's really nothing they can do. And of course, the younger Barry, who now knows about the fact that the older one went back in time to save the mom, he's like, no, nobody dies. He's like going crazy, and he's like keeps trying to change the time and all that. This is when you realize that he's actually was the entity or whatever that showed up and knocked out older Barry at the beginning of the movie, and he's pretty much the Dark Flash, is what it is. And you can see him like going crazier and crazier, and then his future self shows up there to kill there to kill the older original Barry to stop him from stopping um, his younger self, basically, from going back in time and becoming the future Dark Flash. That he's been going back in time so much, the younger one is, from the alternate Tim Burton timeline, that he's basically went crazy. Now he's got like white hair and everything because he's been trying to like solve the timeline issue and everything to prevent it to where nobody dies. But at the same time, though, because he's been messing with the time stream so much, the whole multiverse is starting to collapse in on itself. And this is when you get all the cameos. I will say this, it did feel like the movie stopped slightly to give all these cameos, but it made sense in context of where the movie was at to show all these cameos. Some of the CGI for some of the, of course, the actors that have passed to show off their cameos, like Superman and his version of Supergirl, Helen Slater, seeing them together. It looks good at first when they show it from a certain angle, but when they show it at another angle, it does look a little wonky. But it was really cool seeing Christopher Reeve. And then you get a cameo from Adam West with one of him actually saying one of his lines, like, in Adam West style, talking about the Joker or whatever. Which is really cool. You get Nick Cage's Superman, which was probably my favorite cameo. Some people won't get that because that's from a Superman movie that was almost made in the 90s by Tim Burton, but wound up not getting made, and he's actually fighting a giant spider just like he was supposed to do in that movie. That was pretty damn funny. I like that. Another cameo from like an older version of Flash, like I think he may have been from like the TV series possibly, or one of the comics or something, like one of the older versions of Flash. Yeah, but you just get a shit ton of cameos right here. And they're all pretty fun to see. The Nicolas Cage one had me rolling. Once again, sorry about the coughing. There's humidity in here. That Nicolas Cage cameo had me laugh my ass off. Um, but so they got a basically the the main Dark Flash or whatever, who's like the older version of the young Barry from the Burton timeline. Which the Justice League, the Metahumans don't exist in the Burton timeline. Basically, there's no Superman. There's nothing like that in this timeline. Um, so he the Dark Flash he tries to kill Barry Prime, which is the one from the Snyder Cut and all the other DCEU movies, tries to kill him, and so his younger self jumps in the way, takes the hit, he gets killed, which causes the future Dark Flash to like disappear. And once again, some of the timeline stuff is a bit confusing with all the multiverse stuff. It does get to be a little much. They do reference Back to the Future multiple times, but at the same time, though, you can pretty much follow where they're going with stuff. So that takes care of the Dark Flash. And so that's when Barry Prime, Ezra Miller Prime, decides that the only way to basically fix everything is to go back in time and actually stop himself from saving his mom, which the way to save his mom was to prevent her from having to go back to the grocery store to get another can of soup. So he basically put 2 cans of soup in her shopping cart when he came back to like change the timeline to stop her from being killed. So he goes back in time after his self has already put the other can of soup in there, and he takes it out, and he's gonna go put it back on the shelf. And that's when you get like a heartfelt moment with him and his mom, where he's like saying goodbye to her and all that. Very emotional scene. Ezra Miller once again. Sorry about the coughing again. I'm really sorry. It's just the humidity in here again, And no, it's not a cop out. But yeah, the humidity in here is pretty bad. But yeah, it's a very emotional scene and well acted by Ezra Miller. Just very great done in the way it's put together. An emotional song playing. And he puts the can of soup back basically to ensure his mom's death, which will prevent him from altering the Tim Burton timeline and all the timelines, which will prevent Zod from like showing up in that world to destroy that world. So that'll never happen. And so basically, Michael Keaton's Batman and Supergirl will like, if that timeline and all that, will never meet Barry. None of that'll ever happen. So he just corrects everything, but before he does though, he decides to like move the can of soup on the top shelf. So when his dad is in there to go get the can of soup, that he'll have to raise his head up towards the camera, and that will exonerate him from the murder that he's being blamed for. He does so instead of changing the past, he decides to change the past once again. Except this time he doesn't think the percussions are going to be as bad because he's changing much more of a minor thing, he feels like. So, yeah, that is a little bit of a cop-out that he's going to risk changing the timeline yet again. That is a bit of a cop-out. But it doesn't matter. But it is saved. I can see a lot of people maybe having a little bit of a problem with that he's going to do it again. But it does save. Like, it does. The ending of the movie, the final scene, does make up for it because it's a pretty friggin' hilarious ending. So he does that, and he goes back to his own timeline. He thinks is his own timeline. He thinks everything has been, changed for the better, and he sees his dad getting exonerated, and he's like, yeah. And then Batman's pulling up, and he's like, oh, Bruce, because, he expects it to be Ben Affleck again. And out walks fucking George Clooney, that he's in the George Clooney timeline now, which I thought was hilarious. And George Clooney walks up and he's like, what? It's me, Barry. And Ezra Miller looks at him and goes, who the fuck are you? And that's how it ends. That was hilarious. Hilarious. That was great. It is kind of weak that they decided to end the movie on another timeline joke after he's like solved so much of the timeline issues. It is kind of weak, but at the same time, it is so damn funny seeing George Clooney there that it made up for it for me. But that's what did take it from like what maybe it could have been like an A+ film down to like an A film. But still, though, it was hilarious. Yeah, it was an awesome joke to end the movie on. And the bonus scene after the credits is just kind of a one-note joke. It's not really worth staying for unless you just have to see the bonus scenes. It's not set up for anything. Like all the talk about how this was going to like erase the Snyderverse and everything. It doesn't erase anything. It just shows that there's alternate timelines in this, multiverse, where they can go off and do a new DCEU or new DCU or whatever in a new timeline. But it doesn't erase the Snyderverse. It just says that's in a different timeline. That this original DC, that all the DC universes, all the DC film universes are all different timelines. That's basically all it says. It doesn't erase anything. But yeah, the bonus scene after the credits is apparently, it seems like Ezra Miller's Flash has returned back to his own timeline, and he's telling like Aquaman the story about what happened. with all the different Batmans, and Aquaman is like drunk, and he's like falling down in water and everything, and he like gives Barry his ring, and Barry just kind of walks off. That's pretty much it. It's just a one note gag thrown in there as a joke, which it is kind of it is a weak like post credit scene in terms of like expecting this movie to like set up a new universe and a new DCU or whatever. It doesn't really set up anything besides the fact of the whole multiverse thing, to where you can say that the James Gunn Superman Lives reboot or whatever is in in another universe. You know, it's in another alternate timeline, and I think that's what maybe they're gonna try to say with that Superman Lives movie. I think that's what James Gunn is gonna try to do. He's just gonna try to say that all this stuff takes place in multiverses. This new Superman, Lives movie is just in a multiverse that has some of the same actors from the regular DCEU, but it's its own thing. I think that's what it's its own universe. I think that's what James Gunn is trying to say, tried to say when he was saying this film like resets the DC universe, because it really doesn't reset anything. It just opens up the possibility for a new reboot to take place in its own timeline. That's all it does. So I guess in a way it does kind of reset stuff, but not in the way you would think. But yeah. So yeah, all overall, awesome, fun movie. Not a perfect masterpiece. There are some flaws, but overall, easily one of the best DC movies in recent years. Um, and one of the better comic book movies. I'll say this about the DC film universe. I don't hate the DC film universe. Like, I'm a fan of the DC EU like as it is. I haven't loved all the movies, but I've enjoyed most of them. I liked Batman versus Superman. I liked Man of Steel. I think when it comes to the DCEU, I think it just came about too late because Marvel had already built their own universe, and the DCEU was just in competition with the MCU, and people were comparing it to how it built its universe, including me. Like, I was harder on the DCEU at first because I was comparing it directly to the MCU, and I will say this: the MCU is still much better than the DCEU just because of how cohesive it feels as a universe. This universe, no matter how you feel about different movies in it, it does lack cohesion. Um, but the MCU, yeah, is still better, and I still think that, and I'm still a bigger fan of the MCU. But I'm a DC fan in general. Like, I'm a bigger DC fan as a whole. But in terms of MCU versus DCEU, the MCU is better. Even though Phase 4 has been pretty weak, like overall though, still as a whole, the MCU is better. But in terms of DCEU though, I do think it's suffered from like how the MCU built stuff, and just the fact that it came second, because people are just comparing it directly. They've always been comparing it just directly to the MCU and how the MCU did stuff, how they built up character after character, and then did the big team up movie. And the DCEU just throws you directly into like the big team up movies, and just throws you directly into like an already pretty much established universe. The only thing really new in it is like Superman and a couple other characters who get their minor origin stories, but for the most part, this universe is like lived in and been around for a long time, because you got a much older Batman and an older Joker with Jared Leto and all his gang tats and everything. He's been around for a while, and most of the heroes have already been established in this universe. So you're not really getting like the origin thing and the build up and all that with these characters like you do with the MCU. And I think that kind of hurt the DCEU. I think they would have flowed better with mainstream audiences and stuff if they would have just done hero solo movies and then build up to a Justice League movie and just did the same thing as the MCU did. Because I think people are directly comparing how they structure their universe to how DC did theirs. And I think the DC universe gets knocked down some points because of that. And I think that's why people are harder on them. But if you don't compare it to the MCU and just judge these movies as their own universe, as their own DCEU, just as their own take on the DC characters as their own universe, then I honestly think it's a good universe. And I think most of the films are pretty entertaining. Not great, most of them, but they're mostly good. Like, I still really enjoy BVS, the Ultimate Cut. And I liked Man of Steel, and I really liked the Snyder Cut. So yeah, and Suicide Squad was a flawed, messy movie, but a fun one. Like, even though it wasn't really a Suicide Squad movie. The real Suicide Squad movie is James Gunn's movie, which goes more by the comics. The first Suicide Squad movie is just kind of a fun popcorn blockbuster, kind of similar to like Batman Forever. But hell, I was able to accept it for what it was and enjoy it for what it was, just because I had fun. Like, I'm the type of person, if you entertain me, I can forgive certain things. Unless it's like a property I feel really hardcore passionate about. But yeah, overall, yeah, I think if you just, I think the DCEU, like for the most part, in the future will be, people will take it more easier on them when there's not this whole competition with Marvel and all that, and people will just judge them as their own movies. People who weren't around like me at this time of this whole comic movie craze, they won't be comparing them to the MCU. They'll just watch them for their own universe and all that. But yeah, I think if you just take the DCU by itself and don't compare it to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and how they structure things and all that, and just judge it as its own universe, honestly think it's good. It's still not great as a whole, but it's good. Um, Overall, though, thank you guys for watching. And before I go, go see this movie. It's not doing well in theaters because of the already divisive reputation to the DCEU and because of the fact that comic book movie fatigue is kind of set in for people. It's worth seeing in theaters. If you are a fan of DC or just good superhero movies, this is worth seeing. So, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you again.